The last video that you watched was on center of interest. This one will be about balance. Balance within a composition has to do with the visual weight of your subjects within the composition, within the painting or drawing. You can easily get things that are weighted too far to one side so that things feel like they're going to topple over or going to get squished because things are too weighty up top, and I'll show you some examples of that shortly. But it's very important to be paying attention, along with all the other things that I'm going to be asking you to be paying attention to. But balance is one of those things that you do need to be paying attention to. Here you can see on the top there are examples of symmetrically balanced paintings that look all nice, formal, and organized. And generally speaking, although this is not hard and fast, but generally symmetrically balanced paintings places a really strong emphasis on a central axis. All the elements are just nicely balanced from left to right, from top to bottom. They almost, but not exactly, but they look sort of like mirror images of each other. They also have a feeling of calmness to them, a kind of peacefulness to them. And there are a lot of botanical art and illustration compositions that are based on this theme of kind of peacefulness and quietness. So it's something that you can take advantage of when you're trying to come up with what your intent for this painting is do you want this to feel peaceful? Now, the bottom one, the asymmetrical little thumbnails, it shows a bit more freedom where your subjects can be placed. It allows from randomness, for a freedom of the shapes to go off in lots of different directions. There's no rules really, no hard rules for creating asymmetry. It's kind of based on a rhythm, kind of like a percussion that's uneven versus very, very steady beats. So it's this kind of percussive feeling to it. It also tends to be a little bit more exciting, tends to jump around a little bit more. So you can see how that could play into the intent as well. Now, for both of them, you need to think carefully about how to adjust the size, the shape, the color, and the placement to find the type of balance you want to get with your piece. And you're going to need to, in some ways, you're going to almost need, except for those of you who are born innately with this, which I am not, you kind of have to learn how the balance is supposed to feel. And that's what I hope one of the things that you'll get out of this class is the beginning of the understanding for how asymmetry feels, how symmetry feels, and how to play with that. In botanical illustration, most paintings look more stable if the elements are placed towards the bottom. Think of it as the plant growing out of the ground into the sun. Most plants are growing out of the ground into the sun, so you want to leave some extra white space towards the top to give it the feeling of air and sky. Now, if it's a vine, you want to do the opposite. You want to have it almost coming out of the air or coming out from the side, giving it lots of room, lots of places for the eye to move through. So to show you, So here we've got this nicely grounded. You can see it's got I think it's got too much white space. I'm going to play with the cropping a little bit so you can watch and see how this changes. But you can see this has got lots of breathing room. Your eye has got places to move around and move through and move in and out. And then it comes up here and it feels nice. Now, if we just start lowering this bit by bit, I just want you to slowly, bit by bit, kind of feel how this changes, how the positive shapes and negative spaces change as we crop this further and further on down. So this has got, to me, a nice amount of white space. It could probably come down just a little bit more, so let's take it down just a little bit more. And that's nice. Before, the very, very first one, you'll note that this was almost dead center if we drew a line horizontally. So that's why it kind of felt like it had too much white space. And now you can see how the negative spaces are really starting to interact with the frame itself. If we come down and we do this, your Slucky Flower's got to do this. I mean, it really tightens it down too much. If we come in here, do you feel how that's super, super tight? It's uncomfortable feeling. It's so tight. And I'm going to open this back up a little bit. Let's get that line out. Does this space leave you feeling like, I hope, that why is this here? This is just literally dead white space. There's nothing going on. It has no meaning. It serves no purpose. So this is why, for this particular composition, for this subject, that it is better to have this a little bit more grounded. You could also, because this too is perfectly fine, is to come down here so that the bottom of the plant is coming out from underneath the frame. What you want to stay away from, though, is where it kisses. That's what you do not want to have, is this right here. This is so close it could count as kissing when you get a distance away from it, because these two will start blending together. So that's one thing that you need to be looking for. Another thing, which is extremely common because it's hard to stay away from. Oh, that's a terrible square. Okay. This is what I call the telephone pole syndrome, that is fairly consistent with all of us because I've done this before too. You just leave this nasty straight line. One of the things about plants is that they rarely go just vertical like a building does. There's usually a slight sway to them, and you want to use that and play with that. Even if it looks absolutely straight up and down, try to give it a little bit of movement, a little bit of side to side, a little bit of curve, something so that it's not so deadly straight, especially having it so deadly straight so close to the side of the frame. Because what happens, let me erase this so you can see. What happens is you look at this, but you really spend an inordinate amount of time just going up and down and up and up and up and down between here. And you slide back over here and you look at all these interesting little shapes, and you kind of go like this and you go like this. So you want to be very, very careful when it comes to that straight telephone pole. Let's look at a drawing that is too heavy on top and leaning too far over. Do you see how this is almost just pitching you outside, out, just pitching you out? And it's also coming straight out of the corner. So it is just your eyes coming in and moving out. Now, to correct that, what we could do So now you've got this flow. See how your eye is coming around? It comes back here. We have this one little thing that takes you over here. You come back around, you look here. So now we have created flow into this composition. This is going to sound like a, well, duh, but big, heavy objects just feel like they weigh more than other, smaller stuff. So you can have a really, really big something or another right here. Your weight is all on the top. It almost feels like it's going to fall on top of it, on top of this little guy. If I take this right here, if I blacken this thing in, it's really very, very weighty on top. Now, this is something you can make work, because if your intent is to have this, giant fruit up here that's hanging down from, a tree, and then you've got a little seed right here, it would make sense. Or maybe you have a couple seeds and maybe a little slice of fruit or something. But then it could kind of make sense. That's a horrible composition, but I hope you'll get the idea. So you can play with this, but you also have to be careful that it's just not so weighty on top that it feels like it's going to squish what's underneath it. And this is where getting critiques by your colleagues can help a lot. And I get a lot of my work critiqued by professional artists, because they're going to see things that I'm so closely involved with my drawings, I just don't necessarily see everything that's going on. And going to the open studio and getting your colleagues to look at, or even your classmates for that matter, they're going to see things that you're just going to go, oh my gosh, why didn't I see that before? So just keep that in mind. Let's look at some of the good and bad ways that we balance our drawings when we first get started doing the compositions. These are common areas that many of us make, but there's just something, there are things that you need to, again, be aware of as you're doing your thumbnails next class. So one of the not so good ways to balance your painting is to split it in half. You don't want your composition to be weighted in half, whether it's on the vertical or the horizontal. So what you've got is all your weight is down here on the bottom with a whole lot, or on the side, and then you've got a whole lot of completely flat out, morbidly dead white space. So what you want to be thinking about when you do this is, these are better ways to be thinking about it, is if you're wanting something deep like possibly grasses or irises, you want to be thinking about thirds, 1/3, 2/3. So this is half and half, and this is, let's see, 1/3, 2/3. So, and you also want to avoid this straight line, which is what I always have a tendency to do, which I try and notice right off the bat. So I'm going to get rid of having all this being a straight line. So and this is just inherently a lot more interesting. Do you see how the white space, I mean, I know partly because this has got no ups and, well, I'll create some ups and downs here so that you can get an idea. But even with ups and downs, I mean, you really have to encroach up into this in order to break up that white space. So I need to go down into the 2/3. So this would be 2/3 on the long horizontal. It's just a lot more interesting. You also want to, itchy nose, be careful with a different kind of split where and I see this a lot in when people are just starting off. You got this bushy plant and you split it on the diagonal. That's something you want to stay away from. You either want to have it, your bushy plant, doing something like this, where again, this is more of a 1/3, well, let me get rid of that line. This is going to be more of the mass of it is going to be down here, lower. So it's more of a 1/3, 2/3 instead of half and half. So I hope you can see this is just a lot more interesting the more ins and outs you have. Let's see, make sure I've got that. Yes, and I also want you to beware of, let's see, here. A lot of times you get these plants and they're so, you just put them side by side. Now this can make for symmetrical drawing, but it's also has a tendency to become, especially if they're two different species, literally two separate drawings, because neither the subject nor how it's drawn, nothing is tying them together. They're just two balanced, I mean, they're balanced, but they're so disparate that they can't, they're just, the subjects aren't talking to each other. So you need to either make, maybe make this smaller, but you need to get some overlapping of the two so that they're starting to tie themselves together. And so now you have something that's a little bit more, it's definitely a little bit more symmetrical, but it's also, they're starting to talk to each other. And when you start getting into drawing a perspective, an aerial perspective, where you can learn about getting things in front and in back, that's where you can really use that principle of aerial perspective, is with two specimens like this. Let me make sure I've got everything I needed to discuss. And yes, I did. Before we proceed to the next video within this class with new concepts, I want to go over just a little bit more about balance and where your mat is going to be, where you're going to crop your painting, and just show you how much that can affect the balance of your painting. One of the things about asymmetrical and symmetrical botanical art is generally, this is not a rule, but generally it is a good idea to have this side and this side sometimes at the top, and we'll look at this, sometimes at the top, but it just seems to feel better. Let me take the arrows out. This is starting to feel too squeezed. I think I can live with this. But again, there's a lot of white space here. If I draw this line here, we have another really cramped composition with this being way too close here, and it's not grounded down here. So now all three sides are fairly equidistant. It's still a little bit too close here, so I'm going to narrow this up here. And that's feeling a lot better. This composition is much better balanced within its space. So you really need to have a balanced composition before you get to the painting, because it's good, you want your shapes to be really distributed well. You need to be concerned where you put those shapes, because you want there to be a equilibrium within your final painting that's pleasant to look at. Now there are times, especially with abstract art and some landscapes, where you can play with that equilibrium to make things a little uncomfortable. And I'm sure you could find plants where you could do that as well. But that goes into your storytelling again, your intent of what you're trying to say to a person, of, maybe this plant is dying, so you make the whole entire composition feel a little uncomfortable, which is not to say that the buyer is exactly going to want to buy an uncomfortable painting, but a lot of times uncomfortable paintings can get into the big shows. So I will see you in our next video.